It's just past midday. The sky is impossibly blue, the kind of perfect, silent calm that makes a day feel eternal. In a crowded Roman marketplace, a baker pulls fresh bread from his oven. The loaves are golden, warm, ordinary. He stamps his name into the crust just like he always does, never imagining that 2,000 years later those same loaves will still exist, frozen in time. A few streets away, a dog strains against its chain in a sunlit courtyard. A family laughs over lunch. Someone scrubs clothes in a basin. Lovers argue. Children run. Life is everywhere. Normal. Alive. Unaware. Because behind them, the mountain is waking up. Not one person in this city, not a single soul among the thousands, realizes they are living the final hours of their lives. No warning, no escape, no tomorrow. Then, the mountain explodes. Not erupts. Explodes. A column of ash and fire punches into the sky, turning day into night. The ground trembles, the air burns, and within hours an entire city begins to disappear, buried, suffocated, erased. By the next morning, Pompeii is gone, not destroyed, but swallowed whole, lost so completely that the world will forget it ever existed for over 16 centuries. And when it is finally uncovered, they won't just find ruins. They'll find life, interrupted, meals still on the table, graffiti still on the walls, and the haunting, frozen shapes of people captured in their final moments, reaching, shielding, holding on to each other as the darkness closed in. But here's the part no one tells you. The final hours of Pompeii didn't happen the way you think they did, and the truth about that last morning is far more terrifying. This is the story of Pompeii. Let's go back to the beginning. To understand why Pompeii's destruction is so haunting, you have to understand what was actually lost, because this wasn't some dusty, half-abandoned outpost. Pompeii was alive, loud, colorful, messy in all the ways real cities are messy. The city sat on the southeastern coast of Italy, in what's now the Campania region, just southeast of modern Naples. It was built on a ridge of hardened lava from some ancient, long-forgotten eruption near the mouth of the Sarnus River, what we call the Sarno today. That location was no accident. The soil around Vesuvius was extraordinarily fertile, built up over thousands of years by volcanic minerals. Grapevines and olive trees thrived here. Pompeii sat on a trade route with a river giving it access to the sea. It was, in short, a prime piece of real estate, prosperous, well-connected, and comfortable. At the time of its destruction, somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people called Pompeii home. Walk through its streets today, and you genuinely can. The layout survives almost perfectly. And you'll find deep grooves worn into the stone paving by cartwheels, grooves carved not by one dramatic event, but by decades, maybe centuries, of ordinary daily traffic. Bread carts, wine carts, people walking to work. The city had everything you'd expect from a thriving Roman town, and a few things that might surprise you. There were bathhouses, heated by an ingenious system of underfloor channels called a hypocaust, where wealthy and working Pompeians alike could soak, gossip, and get a scrape down with an oil-covered bronze tool called a strigil. There was an amphitheater, one of the oldest surviving stone amphitheaters in the entire Roman world, where gladiators fought, and famously where a riot once broke out between Pompeian fans and visitors from a rival town. A brawl so violent that the Emperor Nero banned games there for 10 years. Sports rivalries, it turns out, are not a modern invention. There were 2 theaters for plays and music. There was a forum, the civic and religious heart of the city, ringed with temples to Jupiter, Apollo, and the imperial cult. There were over 30 bakeries, their millstones still standing today like stone teeth. There were laundries, called pholonike, where workers stomped on clothes soaked in, brace yourself, fermented urine, because the ammonia was excellent for getting stains out. There were more than 150 establishments serving food and wine, essentially ancient fast food counters called thermopolia, with large ceramic jars sunk into stone counters to keep food warm. And yes, some still had food residue inside them when excavated. And there was graffiti. So much graffiti. This is one of the things that makes Pompeii feel less like a museum and more like a time capsule of actual human personality. Scrawled onto the plastered walls of buildings in a city where roughly 2,000 inscriptions have survived. You'll find political campaign slogans. You'll find a man complaining that his friend borrowed money and never paid it back. You'll find declarations of love, crude jokes, and insults about a bartender's watered-down wine. There's a piece of graffiti near an entrance that essentially amounts to, "I was here," a sentiment as old as walls themselves. This was not a museum piece city frozen in marble solemnity. It was loud. It smelled like bread and fish sauce and unwashed bodies and animal dung in the sea. People argued about rent, kids ran through alleys, slaves worked, merchants haggled. Somebody somewhere was almost certainly nursing a hangover on the morning of August 24th, 79 CE, with absolutely no idea that it would be the last hangover of their life. Because looming over all of it, visible from nearly every street, every courtyard, every rooftop, was the mountain. Mount Vesuvius is what geologists call a stratovolcano, a steep, cone-shaped mountain built up over thousands of years by layer upon layer of hardened lava, ash, and rock from previous eruptions. And that's precisely the problem with Vesuvius, and with volcanoes like it. It had been quiet for so long that nobody alive in 79 CE had ever seen it actually erupt. The mountain slopes were covered in lush vegetation and vineyards. The Roman writer and geographer Strabo, writing decades before the disaster, actually described the summit as looking scorched and barren in a way that suggested past volcanic activity. But that was ancient history to the people living there. To them, Vesuvius wasn't a volcano. It was just the mountain, a green, fertile, unremarkable backdrop to daily life. There had been warning signs, though, big ones, in hindsight. 17 years before the eruption, in 62 CE, a massive earthquake tore through the region, badly damaging Pompeii and neighboring towns. Many buildings were still under repair when Vesuvius finally erupted. You can actually see this in the archaeological record. Half-finished renovations frozen mid-project. Smaller earthquakes continued in the years and days leading up to the eruption. Wells and springs reportedly dried up. Animals reportedly grew restless. But earthquakes were simply a fact of life in that region, and nobody connected the dots. Why would they? There was no science of volcanology yet. There was no concept of a super volcano building pressure beneath their feet. There was just a green mountain and an occasional rumble in the ground. Underneath that green, peaceful-looking slope, though, something catastrophic had been building for centuries. Magma, molten rock loaded with dissolved gases, had been slowly accumulating in a chamber deep beneath the volcano. As magma rises toward the surface, pressure drops, and dissolved gases begin to come out of solution, much like opening a shaken soda bottle. Given enough gas, enough pressure, and a violent enough release, the result isn't a gentle lava flow, it's an explosion. And on August 24th, in the year 79 CE, that's exactly what happened. We actually know an extraordinary amount about the timeline of this eruption, and we owe that almost entirely to one remarkable young man, Pliny the Younger. He was 17 years old, staying across the Bay of Naples with his uncle, Pliny the Elder, a naval commander and famous naturalist. Pliny the Younger later wrote 2 letters to the historian Tacitus describing what he witnessed. And those letters are so precise, so scientifically observant, that volcanologists today still use the term Plinian eruption to describe this specific violent type of volcanic event. A towering column of ash and gas blasted miles into the sky. Pliny the Younger essentially invented eyewitness volcanology as a teenager, while watching his own world end in the distance. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, did something almost unbelievable when the eruption began. He sailed a naval fleet directly toward the disaster, partly out of scientific curiosity and partly to attempt a rescue of people trapped along the coastline. He would not survive the day. We'll come back to him. Let's walk through this hour by hour because the sheer speed and scale of what happened to Pompeii is almost impossible to grasp unless you slow it down. Sometime around midday on August 24th, 79 CE, Vesuvius erupted with a force that modern estimates place at roughly 100,000 times the thermal energy released by the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. Let that number sit with you for a second. This was not a bad day at a volcano. This was one of the most powerful natural explosions in recorded human history. The mountain blasted a column of superheated gas, pulverized rock, and ash more than 15 miles into the sky, punching straight through the troposphere and into the stratosphere. Pliny the Younger, watching from across the bay, famously compared the shape of the rising column to a Mediterranean pine tree. A long trunk of ash shooting upward, then spreading out into a broad, flat crown where it hit the upper atmosphere and could rise no further. It's one of the most accurate volcanic descriptions ever recorded by a non-scientist, and it was written by a teenager in real time. For the people of Pompeii, the first sign of catastrophe was almost certainly this monstrous black column rising from the summit, and then the sky beginning to fall. Pumice, ash, volcanic rock fragments, some the size of a fist, blasted skyward, and then raining back down under gravity, carried southeast by the prevailing wind, directly onto Pompeii. This is a critical detail. Pompeii wasn't hit by lava. It was hit by hours of relentless debris fall, like the world's most lethal hailstorm, made of stone and ash instead of ice. Just after midday, this material began accumulating over the city. Roofs groaned and began collapsing under the growing weight. Streets filled. Within a matter of hours, more than 9 feet, roughly 3 meters, of pumice and ash had blanketed Pompeii. Try to picture that. Debris rising past your waist, then your chest, then over your head, all falling from the sky in a matter of hours, all while the light dims to an unnatural volcanic twilight, and the air fills with sulfurous fumes and the constant, terrifying rumble of the earth and sky. Many residents fled during this initial phase, and this matters enormously, because it explains something crucial we'll return to later. Most of Pompeii's population actually survived the eruption. The pumice fall, while terrifying and destructive, gave people a window of hours to escape, and thousands took it, streaming out through the city gates toward the coast or inland, escaping with whatever they could carry. But not everyone left. Some stayed to protect their homes and belongings. Some sheltered indoors, perhaps believing, reasonably, based on any prior experience they had, that the worst had already happened and the storm of stone would eventually stop, the way storms always had before. Some simply couldn't leave. The elderly, the injured, the enslaved who weren't given the choice. Children too young to move quickly through streets already filling with debris. And then, in the darkest hours of the night and into the early morning of August 25th, the eruption changed character entirely into something far more lethal than falling rock. The eruption column, which had been sustaining itself for hours, began to lose the energy needed to keep shooting material straight up into the sky. When a volcanic column can no longer support its own height, it collapses. And when it collapses, it doesn't just fall. It surges outward and downward in what's called a pyroclastic flow, a fluidized, superheated avalanche of volcanic gas, ash, and rock fragments racing down the mountainside and across the surrounding landscape at speeds that can exceed 100 miles an hour, at temperatures that can reach several hundred degrees Celsius. This is the part of the Pompeii story that is genuinely difficult to sit with. A pyroclastic flow doesn't give you time to run. It doesn't give you time to make a decision. It moves faster than a person can sprint, and it doesn't care whether you're indoors or outdoors, hiding in a cellar or standing in the street. The first surge reached Pompeii on the morning of August 25th, and within moments asphyxiated anyone still remaining in the city who hadn't already succumbed to the falling debris. Additional pyroclastic flows and further rounds of ash followed, ultimately burying Pompeii under at least 19 feet, about 6 meters, of volcanic material in total. 19 feet! An entire city with its temples and bathhouses and bakeries and bedrooms buried deeper than a 2-story building in less than 24 hours. We don't know with certainty how many people died at Pompeii. What we do know paints a picture that's more complicated, and in a strange way more hopeful than most people assume. Historians generally estimate the death toll at around 2,000 people, and more than 1,000 bodies have been recovered from the site so far. Most of them appear to have died from asphyxiation, suffocated by ash and toxic gases, or killed instantly by the extreme heat of the pyroclastic surges. But here's the detail people often miss. Pompeii's population at the time is estimated at somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people. That means the overwhelming majority of Pompeians, likely more than 80% of the population, actually escaped the city before it was fully overwhelmed. That's an important correction to the popular image of Pompeii as a city where everyone died where they stood. Most people got out. What we're left with in the archaeological record is a haunting minority. Those who, for one reason or another, could not or would not leave in time. And this is where we need to talk about how their final moments were preserved. Because it's one of the most extraordinary archaeological techniques ever developed. When the pyroclastic material buried victims, it hardened around their bodies. Over time, the soft tissue decomposed, leaving a void, a perfectly detailed body-shaped cavity in the hardened ash, like a mold. In the 1860s, an archaeologist named Giuseppe Fiorelli realized that if you carefully drilled into these voids and poured liquid plaster inside, you could create an exact cast of a human being in their final moment, their posture, their clothing folds, even the expressions frozen on their faces. The result is some of the most emotionally devastating archaeology on Earth. There's a group of casts known as the family, found huddled together in a house, believed to have died together in their final moments. There's a cast of a dog, still chained, twisted into an agonized position, unable to escape. There are figures with their hands over their faces or curled protectively around each other. These aren't sculptures. They are literal physical echoes of real human beings experiencing the last seconds of their lives, preserved by chance and later recovered by scientific ingenuity nearly 2,000 years later. And we have to talk about Pliny the Elder, because his death is one of the best documented individual deaths from the ancient world. And it says something remarkable about human nature. Pliny the Elder was a Roman naval commander stationed across the Bay of Naples, and also one of the great naturalists of his age, the author of an enormous encyclopedia called Natural History. When the eruption began, he initially set out with a small vessel simply to observe the phenomenon up close, driven by scientific curiosity. But then he received a desperate message from a friend trapped on the coast near the volcano, and he changed course entirely, ordering his fleet to sail directly toward the eruption, not away from it, in an attempt to rescue people trapped by the disaster. He made it to the shore near Stabiae, south of Pompeii, but by then, winds and sea conditions made further evacuation by ship impossible. He spent the night with terrified friends, reportedly trying to reassure them, at one point supposedly explaining away the flames on the mountainside as burning villages abandoned by fleeing peasants, either genuinely misunderstanding what he was seeing or calmly lying to keep others from panicking. The next morning, amid thickening fumes and falling debris, he collapsed and died, likely from the toxic gases, possibly compounded by a pre-existing respiratory condition. He died trying to save others. His nephew lived to write it all down. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Pompeii didn't just get destroyed, it got erased. The layers of ash and pumice were so deep and so effectively buried the city's structures that within a generation or two, the precise location of Pompeii began to fade from common memory. The landscape itself changed. The coastline shifted. New soil formed over the debris. Vineyards eventually grew again over what had once been a bustling Roman city. Pompeii essentially vanished from the map, known only through scattered historical references, for close to a millennium and a half. It wasn't until the late 16th century that the first hints of the buried city resurfaced. Quite literally, an architect working on a water channel project in the area, Domenico Fontana, dug through ruins and inscriptions but didn't fully grasp what he'd stumbled onto. The truly systematic rediscovery didn't begin until the mid-18th century, when excavations in the region, first at nearby Herculaneum, another town buried by the same eruption, and then at Pompeii itself, began in earnest. This moment matters far beyond Pompeii's own story, because these excavations, beginning in the mid-1700s, are widely credited as the starting point of archaeology as a modern scientific discipline. Before Pompeii, digging up the past was mostly treasure hunting. Wealthy patrons looking for impressive statues and artifacts to decorate their estates with little regard for context or careful documentation. Pompeii changed that gradually, because the city had been preserved so completely. Not just monuments, but ordinary houses, ordinary tools, ordinary food, ordinary graffiti. It forced excavators to reckon with an entire intact snapshot of daily life, not just its treasures. Over time, This pushed the field toward more careful, systematic scientific methods of documentation and preservation. Methods that Giuseppe Fiorelli, the same man behind the plaster cast technique, helped pioneer in the 19th century by excavating in careful horizontal layers rather than tunneling straight down to grab valuable objects. In an almost poetic twist, the disaster that destroyed Pompeii in a single day is also indirectly the reason we have the entire modern discipline of archaeology, the very tools that let us study lost human civilizations at all. So why does any of this still matter, nearly 2,000 years later? Why do millions of people travel to Pompeii every single year to walk its ash-buried streets? Because Pompeii isn't really a story about death. It's a story about interruption. Most ancient sites we study were abandoned gradually, used, reused, stripped for building materials, worn down by centuries of weather and human activity before anyone thought to preserve them. Pompeii is different. Pompeii was a living, breathing, ordinary Roman city that was essentially switched off in a single day and sealed in a protective shell for a millennium and a half. That's what makes it archaeologically priceless. It isn't a monument built to be remembered. It's an ordinary Tuesday frozen in place. Because of that, Pompeii has given historians an unmatched window into the actual texture of Roman life, not just the lives of emperors and senators that dominate written histories, but the lives of bakers, launderers, tavern owners, enslaved workers, and ordinary families. We know what Pompeians ate because carbonized food survived in kitchens and shops. Bread, olives, fish, fruit. We know how they decorated their homes, from the vivid, almost photographically vibrant frescoes in wealthy houses like the House of the Vetii, to simpler decorations in more modest homes. We know about their religious lives from household shrines called lauraria, found in nearly every home, dedicated to protective spirits and gods. We know about their sense of humor, their grudges, and their gossip because they wrote it directly onto the walls in their own handwriting. We also know in uncomfortable detail about the realities of slavery in the Roman world, chains, cramped quarters, and grim evidence of the labor that propped up the city's comforts. Pompeii doesn't just preserve beauty, it preserves inequality, economics, politics, religion, and everyday cruelty and kindness alike, all layered together exactly as they existed on one ordinary summer day. This is why archaeologists describe Pompeii's importance in terms of social, economic, religious, and political life, because it's genuinely one of the only places on Earth where we can study all four of those threads simultaneously, in extraordinary physical detail, from a single, tightly dated moment in time. And the excavation is still ongoing right now, in 2026. Roughly a third of Pompeii remains unexcavated to this day. Every few years, new discoveries make headlines. Newly uncovered frescoes, newly identified victims, new insights into construction techniques, and diet and disease. Pompeii isn't a finished story. It's an active archaeological site, and researchers are, quite literally, still learning new things about that single catastrophic day. So here we are, back where we started. A perfect blue sky, a baker's oven full of bread, a city about to disappear. I promised you at the beginning that the very last thing I'd tell you would change how you think about that final morning. Here it is. Mount Vesuvius has erupted many times since 79 CE, including a devastating eruption in 1631 and eruptions as recently as 1944. Geologists studying it today classify it as one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the world. not because it's unusually powerful compared to others, but because of what surrounds it now. Millions of people live in the shadow of Vesuvius today, in Naples and the surrounding towns, in a densely populated region that would give modern authorities only hours, maybe less, to evacuate in the event of another major eruption. The mountain that buried Pompeii in a single day, the one whose danger nobody in 79 CE recognized until it was too late, is still there. It's still active, and it's still ringed by hundreds of thousands of people living ordinary lives under a green, quiet, deceptively peaceful slope, almost exactly the way Pompeii once did. Pompeii isn't just a story about the ancient past. It's a warning that was buried right alongside the city. And in a strange, quiet way, it's still waiting there today for anyone paying close enough attention. If this story moved you the way it moved me putting it together, let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's most extraordinary moments, and I'll see you in the next one.